Aloha and welcome. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about dynamic typing. So in order to understand dynamic typing, first you need to understand what static typing is. So in compiled languages, you'll often see static typing, where in your code, you actually specify what type each variable is going to be. If it's going to be a string, an integer, a float, things like that. In Python, we're using dynamic typing. So dynamic typing is very flexible. It allows you to change the typing as you go along in the program. You can go from a float to an integer quite easily, but it is a little bit more susceptible to errors. And you may have found some of these when you've tried printing things, like maybe when you tried combining strings with integers, and you'll hit errors sometimes there. So you have to be a little bit more careful of that. But the thing to remember is that static typing, it's stricter. It determines that whether or not operations are valid at compile time, whereas when you're using Python, it's going to determine that as the program runs. So just keep that in mind. I'm going to show an example. So bear with me as I pull up my VS Code. So in here, we're looking at an example that I called add. So add is taking a parameter, two parameters, and it's returning the parameter 1 plus parameter 2. So in dynamic typing, what you send this determines what actually happens in there with the plus sign. So if you're sending in integers, you're going to get a mathematical operation. If you're sending in strings, you're going to get concatenation of those two items. So we're going to take a look at this. We're going to run this as is, and it should return a print statement of 6. So it does that. So it's taking in 2 and 4, sending in that as parameter 1 and 2, adding them together and returning 6. But now, if we were to go and look at the second line here, we should see that we get hello concatenated with world, because otherwise hello plus world doesn't really have any numeric arithmetic sense. So when we do that, we see indeed it does print out hello world with no spaces in between. So this is where we get a little bit problematic with Python. Let's say that you're doing something and you're inputting, let's say you get both of these from input, and one of them is an integer and the other one is a string. So what's going to happen in this case? Well, it's going to, at the time of execution, take a look at it and say, okay, we've got a integer here, we've got a string here, and it says, oh, we can't, adding that doesn't make any sense. We can't really make a number out of it. We could make a string, but it's not going to make that determination. So if we try to run this, it's going to give us, like I said, an error, and it's going to show us the line at which it was offended. And it's going to say, it can't do the, it's saying it's an unsupported operand types for plus, integer, and string. So it's going to die on us right here. This is going to happen as it's running. So if this was a statically typed language, we wouldn't have this problem, because it would know what it was being passed. It would know that it had 2 integers or 2 strings or whatever being sent to it at this point. So Python is more susceptible to errors here, but it's more dynamic and it's a lot more flexible and makes for easier coding. So it's not as robust maybe, but it does give you a lot of flexibility. So that's essentially what we want to talk about here. One last thing that the book mentions is duck typing. It's the concept that Python, in its in being a dynamically typed language, it says, well, this thing looks like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it swims like a duck, so it must be a duck. So it's looking at the parameters and it's judging what it thinks it should be based on your parameters here, and that's essentially how it operates. So if you have any questions about dynamic versus static, feel free to ask. I'm happy to talk to you about that. I've had a bit of experience with both types of languages before. I prefer dynamic typed languages just because it's quite easy to use and very flexible. But there is a place for static typing as well out there in different types of applications. So anyway, that's it for this lesson. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me through email or Zoom. We'll see you in the next lesson.